All right, folks, let's go live. Let's get this going. We're going to do a quick stream on this, and then we'll be doing a stream later today on Twitch as kind of a follow-up and some normal mining and grinding kind of thing with some of the newer algorithms that are out there. So let's get a few people in here, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. I have a pretty decent agenda. We're going to try to cut through pretty quick, probably keep it less than 40 minutes or so on YouTube, and then we'll get right into it after the football games, because right after this I'm going to be watching some serious football going on. So we'll let some folks get in there. I'll make sure that you guys can hear me fine, and then we'll get right into the agenda. There's a ton of stuff to cover. I haven't done a live stream since CES, and that was mostly floor roaming, and just kind of as we discovered things, kind of talking about it. So we'll make sure we get some thumbs up from everybody that we're good, and you guys can see me, you can hear me. It's not, everything looks good, sounds good, and then we'll get started. So how's everybody doing? Hopefully everybody's doing okay. Probably down because markets are looking pretty rough, but we're going to cover some stuff to hopefully cheer you up. Looking at acorns tonight? No, not tonight. I do not have the acorns physically here. They're up at the farm up in Wisconsin. GSW Warriors getting wrecked. Pets. Yeah, well, we get about 34 in here now. I'm going to go ahead and get started because I want to make sure that people that rewatch this can get straight into it and get some of the content that I'm going to try to deliver today, and kind of set up essentially what's going on this week from a episode standpoint, from some updates that I'm doing out on bitsbetrippin.io that I've been working on all this morning, and getting those pushed live, and trying to bring you guys some good, fresh content for 2019, get you guys excited about the space. There's a lot going on. Anytime I come back from somewhere like CES, just the energy that's out there from the innovation side, from the excitement. I mean, part of that's the marketing drive from those kind of events, to where people are really excited about their product. This is the time that they actually unveil it, they talk about it. This just isn't, consumer electronics. There's cars out there, car companies. There's innovation, not just in artificial intelligence and machine learning and just how it progresses over a year. It's very interesting. Innovation in just blockchain solutions, people that are trying to match up information on chain and get through that, that I think the hardest barrier right now that the fiduciary side sticks with, just on cryptocurrency, that there's other applicable use cases, and trying to vet those out. The digital money forum that happened at CES, try to cover some of that, pieces. I'm going through what I think is, getting away from kind of the marketing kind of concept and what is the meat and potatoes of those different interviews. So that's what I've been going through to get some content served up to you guys in that. So if you haven't been subscribing, you should subscribe. Tell your friends and folks. I'm going to try to get some very quantitative and qualitative, meaning stuff that makes sense in the space. It gives you confidence that things are in the space are moving ahead. So a lot of the stuff from the CES content that's still outstanding. First and foremost, all of the streams. I did 26 streams at CES. Actually 28 if you count the 2 that were on YouTube already. Most of the other ones were on Twitch, and a lot of it was like the floor roaming. Some of it was talking to, people about products and stuff. All of those streams, most of them are still hosted over at Twitch. Those go away. I am co-locating all of those over to bit.tube. So if you guys don't follow me on bit.tube and you want to go back to those particular pieces of content, I'm moving all those streams up there, and in doing so, I'm making essentially a kind of a quick list to where you can cut through and see specific things. So it's kind of essentially like having timestamps on that. So if you want to see something particular that you heard about CES, did I cover it? Did I walk past it? Did I talk to anybody around it? You'll see that content out on bit.tube. I don't want to call it cluttering up YouTube with just a whole bunch of, roaming streams, where a lot of it's just kind of, there's not a lot of content in like a 2-hour stream. The content's about 15 minutes of it. So at least co-locating all those streams out there, I think it'd give you guys, ability to go back there if you were looking for something specific. So that's getting moved up. The links to those specific videos of those 26 streams, since there's a lot of content, are going to be out on bitsbetrippin.io. So I'm going to put those under the episode database. You'll have an item that says CES, and underneath that, you'll have kind of kind of a tree setup of, you know, what got covered what day. So it's essentially media day 1 and 2, and then there's 4 days of CES content that are out there. That way you don't have to just, you know, you can pick through what you want out there. So that's coming up. That's what I've been working on this morning. And then I'm going to have separate breakout episodes of specific stuff that's coming out. I have one for CoinAgenda. That's the next one that's coming out. CoinAgenda was on day 1. There was an after party for CoinAgenda. It's a cryptocurrency focused component that was not part of CES, but they invited folks that were in media at CES at CoinAgenda. It was actually at Mike Tyson's house, his old house that Michael Turpin had bought. So that was a pretty cool event. There was a lot of, I'd say, excitement in there. It wasn't like just some crazy party. They were actually showcasing on-chain content, stuff that's not just, you know, some ICO. There's actually stuff that was built, and they were displaying what was built, you know, so it's kind of like a software display. A lot of VR, AR stuff in the space that's starting to go to, you know, some innovation of that tech of AR and VR being shown in like a blockchain capacity, meaning like if you have like a search, like like an Explorer search of on-chain content that you can see in VR, and then have a visualization of on-chain content, in addition to like micropayments and all these other facets of the ecosystem that are thriving and growing in the background that aren't necessarily moving price, but there are innovations on the tech that facilitate the groundwork that would allow any kind of transactions and volumes to occur. So some of the stuff that comes from CES or from the CoinAgenda pieces are going to be bottled up. I did 2 interviews when I was out there for folks, one for Blocksafe and another one for Fancaster. It's essentially an ability for people to be on like Twitch and commentate on active live sporting events. And then there's a micropayment system that sits underneath that's using cryptocurrency to allow people to kind of work the way like Twitch works with the whole bits piece, where you can give folks money for their commentation, but they're licensed and able to rebroadcast essentially live sporting events. So if you have somebody that you just like their commentary or something, it's another functionality that just allows a payment gateway to work using cryptocurrency in that capacity. So some interesting ideas, some different approaches on trying to use you know, cryptocurrency as rails functionality to be able to exchange value quickly. Again, a lot of this stuff all comes back down to like how's regulation going to work with that, how's taxation work with that for the folks like in the US and stuff. And I think some of that will start to pan out as companies start to really serve up content, actual working content, like, hey, dude, I got a platform. It does these things. You can sign up. Here's how we exchange value. How's all that work? That's the kind of stuff. And with Wyoming showing some, I would say, very regulatory conditioning that's going on to try to become the rails and the platform to allow companies to come and set up there and then start to work through some of the litigation, I think helps pave the way. There's some really good stuff coming out of there too that we are not covering today, but that owns its own, that really requires its own episode to cover of some of the innovation in that. So CoinAgenda interviews, and then I'll kind of do a recap on kind of mining current status this week. Since I've been out for 2 weeks in the space, just kind of covering content and stuff that's out there from innovation side. There's a lot's changed, and I don't want to say changed, but some new opportunities that came around on the mining scene when it comes to GRIN and the whole, you know, GRIN's launch, the MimbleWimble, essentially concepts and protocol, and then, you know, the underlying algorithms that you can mine to GRIN out there. A few of the other mining channels have covered on how to get onto that and how to start mining and how that entire concept works. And I haven't really worked on any videos pertaining to that since I've been out of town. So we'll talk a current status mining. That will be before Friday, and kind of I'm going to yield to some of the content that's out there to just instead of giving you guys a full tutorial on how to do that, I'm going to point to some of the videos that have been created out there. The Technicals, I think, made one. Seth Estrada made one. Voscoin's done a couple. So really to get you guys kind of set up on that, but I want to take it from a different angle of what's the technology, why does it matter? Well, how's the inflation work? You know, those kind of concepts that may have not been captured on just hey, here's how you mine it. So I'm going to try to bring you guys a different level of exposure to it on that as I've been going through and learning myself some of that. And I have a separate subsection of that today in the agenda with GRIN, the MimbleWimble technology implementation in general. what's it mean for mining, and then there's a good Medium article out there that was produced to kind of explain it to me like I'm 5 with like how it works and how is it different. So that's the kind of an angle that I'm going to try to approach from it architecturally for you guys. So North American Bitcoin Conference, really, that was just occurred. I did not go. So I was down in Florida. Some people were thinking that I was already out, since I was tweeting from Florida that I was down there. I was actually doing some work-related stuff in Orlando. So I was unable to make North American Bitcoin Conference this year. I did get a lot of content from it from folks that were sending stuff to me just to kind of give me a recap of what it is. So I'm going to just give you guys kind of a recap of what I heard, some of the big components or pieces that came out of that. And I think one of the interesting things, and you know, it could be one of those things that are just going to be cringe fest, or maybe it might be good, depends on how well it's sourced, is there's going to be an Entourage style. So anybody that ever watched the TV series Entourage, so an Entourage TV style series called Cryptos is underway. I saw the first graphic of it, and it is kind of one of those things like, oh man, I hope they don't try to embody what like crypto Twitter is and then try to make a TV show out of it, because I think that'll be a disaster. But because the crypto Twitter is kind of it's a real good source of information quickly. Sometimes when you get links to like GitHubs and architecture and what's going on in the space, but it's also it's like a equilibrium of you know, yin and yang, kind of bad and good side of both. So it's just it's supposed to be an agnostic platform, but man, there's a lot of different, you know, cultural, you know, in the ecosystem of crypto that comes out of crypto Twitter. So if it kind of embodies the worst of that, I hope it doesn't, but that's an interesting thing. Again, exposure is exposure. And if it gets people, if they tilt it to a light of the innovation and the technology, the quick onboarding, and then it gives it as an avenue to, you know, kind of like Silicon Valley brought, you know, some people the understanding of why it was a lot of satire and a lot of, you know, that kind of content. There was a lot of the basic principles that were exposed in like software development, some of the grind that you have to do on the VC side. So if it kind of shows some good components of it, maybe it might be okay, but I'm reserving reservations. So that was one of the things that came out of it. And then again, kind of a recap in the space in general. And I think this is a real good encompassment when you really focus most of your effort on the value of crypto and, you know, what bag are you holding? Is it going to go up? Is the team's working on content that's going to give it value proposition on it? Is it going to have the rails that it needs to expand and actually start getting some volume on the chain, and people really start working on things on public permissionless, you know, chains? Like what's going to make it rise? Is it speculation that comes back in, or is it actual innovation and stuff? And when you recap kind of 2018, a lot of the content that you see is a huge drop in the market, but you have all this other content that's been developed in onboarding. You got the scaling of Bitcoin through Lightning, quick and fast transactions, really the concept there. And if anybody remembers back to 2017, December, I remember sitting there talking to people and they were like, oh, I want to invest. They were FOMO and hardcore. But I think the fact that the networks were locked up a lot, you look at CryptoKitties and Ethereum, like what, November of 17, you look at December, really everybody, Binance, everybody was locking down for the fact that you couldn't get, you know, onto their platforms because everything was kind of grinding to a halt. Bitcoin was being attacked from, you know, its transaction pool was just being flooded and caused a huge amount of actual cost when you came to transactions, and the transaction cost was a big issue. You look at what happened over 2018 so far, and the real facts, I'm talking real, no kidding, no FUD, no bull crap facts, that there are platforms being developed that are being tested, that are being shown the fact that you can get a node, you can operate, you can open up your own Lightning channel. There's scalability no matter what side of the decision, if you participate or not, are on. The facts are the facts. There's development going on to increase the speed and the rapidity of these networks. And I don't care if you're on what side of the fence you're on, if you're Ethereum, if you're EOS, if you're anybody on any platform, the fact of the matter is there was a lot of lessons learned from the technology, the engineering side, not so much the FUDsters and the people that were really trying to drive market and value. The folks that were on the engineering layer have known that there needs to be a scalability issue if you try to involve a lot of people, a lot of transaction side. That transaction platform has been being built over the last the last year. It's continuing, and now we're starting to see some of the fruits of those labors. You have liquid sea lightning change. You have bulletproofs. A lot of the tech that starts to create the onboarding for privacy, the onboarding for speed, and the ability to have a lot of microtransactions that don't cost a huge amount of, man in the middle cost, like if you have just a payment gateway that's taken a little bit on the flight of value, that kind of infrastructure is getting put in place to really set up the doors for when these other custodial services come on, that people that are not going to hold their keys, and right, wrong, or indifferent, there's tech out there. You should have your value yourself. You should be able to put it into a ledger and be able to control your own keys. But the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of people out there that are never going to go do that, and that they're going to rely on huge infrastructures and systems to help protect part of that. And again, I'm not going to get on the political side of that being right and wrong or indifferent. Nobody can argue the fact if you have your own crypto and you're holding it yourself, that you have that self-sovereignty of that effect of that. That's kind of, I would call it Zen, the ultimate way of being able to control your own funds. That being said, there's an entire market of people that once the rails are in place and it makes sense from a transactional nature to use those rails. And what I'm saying is rails is the movement of things. If it's value, if it's transactional payment, if it's coordination of information on a chain, to where it's the taxation of the information moving is the transaction on the crypto side, but the information that sits on top is now cryptographically stored. It's, yes, a lot like a database in a lot of ways, but it is distributed. It does give some yield to some centralization, but it's a better system at the end of the day because you can have multiple participants interacting with that versus just one guy that has access to it. We'll get into some of the tech on that side when I do more of a deep dive of how the information is starting to fuse, I think, in the payment channel gateways to where we can start to actually have information transferred there that will be on the rails of cryptocurrency. That's stuff that I'm super involved in, that I'm very excited for, and then starting to manifest that into reality, which brings value to these networks in a public permissionless way, because at the end of the day, if those are the train cars that are running on there, and the train cars are represented as the information, the rails and the gateways that are going through is the facilitation of the cryptocurrency, is facilitating that through, guarantee that data was delivered, guaranteed that it wasn't duplicated, guaranteed that it was encrypted, that no other third party could go in there and manipulate and change the information. That's the real key, the value to that. And if there was some kind of change of that, you would have record of it. So those are huge value adds to the system. The scalability is the rails. You got to build the foundation first for it to rest on and go and run. And that's what's being done right now. Again, you also have a lot of stuff in 2018 that occurred with really time-tested, trusted institution endowments that have put a lot of effort and time. Yale, Harvard, MIT, Cornell continue through all the FUD to provide technology awareness of what are the attack vectors on Bitcoin, what are the attack vectors on some of these cryptocurrencies that are using proof of stake. What are the nothing at stake cost? When I was out in 2014 at one of the crypto conferences, I think it was Hashers United, there was some Cornell folks that came up and they were like, hey, there's this thing called selfish mining. At the time in 2014, it wasn't even a concept. You were just hooking up your GPUs. You were part of the network, and your feedback, was more of just like, yeah, I have GPUs on the network. I spend money and time and I get compensated in token. And we were kind of blindfold to the fact that somebody would game that or try to game that with a selfish chain and get more of the hash power and then broadcast that chain and then screw everybody out of everything, right? At the end of the day, right, wrong, or indifferent on that, it's a functionality of the way things work. And that was an exposure of how that could occur. You could have some entity take a lot of hash power and try to selfish mine their own chain. And it's one of those things that I look at the entire crypto market and I look at just money in general and societies it's like water down a mountain. It's going to find a way and a crack and a crevice no matter what, that we would love it to be on top of the mountain where we could see it, but sometimes that stuff goes through cracks, right? So you got to find out and expose those those situations, and you got to de-incentivize people from being part of that. And part of that is discovery of acknowledging that that occurs, and then figuring out, you know, can you make adjustments to it, or can you make it so poisonous that it doesn't make sense to do it, right? But efforts like that from trusted institutions, from, you know, kids that are focused on it, and that's their day in life. You know, people are like, oh, it's just, you know, a bunch of nerds sitting at school. It's like, well, those nerds at school's whole entire encompassment is research, and that's what they do. And you can only take that so far too. You got to take that research, and then you got to do things with it. How does it apply in the world? You know, does it make sense? Because a lot, even some of those views on peer-reviewed papers, I'm looking at you, Cardano, right? You can have all the research in the world, you can have all the smart brains in the world, but applicational use with all the other idiosyncrasies that go on in the world sometimes pivots and changes, because most of those were kind of closed experiments. And those results of those closed experiments only yield, you know, while factual when it comes to the math and the execution of it, when you start to add in different environmental variables to it, like mood, you know, people that have maybe a staked interest against it, that kind of stuff, then you start getting attacks on those. So the fact that the trusted institutions are still part of it, are still implementing new tech on it, are really breaching the I would say the focus of seeing, you know, what is the best alternatives here is still a good thing. And a lot of that happened in 2018. So this is kind of a recap, I guess, of 2018 that came out of some of the discussions that I heard from North American Bitcoin Conference. And then really the financial institutions continuing to invest and build. Now that's like the double-edged sword, because while most of this was created on the concepts of, you know, not really anti-government, but anti-control in general. So that could be through government, that could be a financial institution that's private or public, that are trying to control a value control, you know, who can make payments on stuff, what do people owe you on those payments. That entire ecosystem of business rules, and that a lot of this was developed to disbar some of that functionality, right, and become more transparent, be able to trade between two parties. But looking at them coming into the system, them being the financial institutions, and onboarding their own infrastructure, for, if I'm talking BAC, if I'm talking New York Stock Exchange, if I'm talking any of the financial vehicles, derivatives, any of that kind of concept of looking at how do those current functionalities work in a world where where crypto is the rails, to where now you can have the deleveraging of all that, you know, I'd say that data load, the transaction load of that in a, you know, even if it's semi-trustless, where it would be like something like EOS, where you're governing it through 21 block producers, or even through something like Ethereum, to where it's a platform where you're building it with a Ethereum virtual machine, where it has Byzantine fault tolerance, and you're trying to complete actions start to finish, and you have accountability of everything, compute, storage, all that accounted for. How do those ecosystems work in that environment, to where right now a lot of that's behind a big data center, and all you see is the reports that come out of it, right? So that right now is a lot of the onboarding and development. So you got the first part of, can it function on it? I think that's what the last 2 years have been. And people have seen enough to say, I think it can, but what are the real questions that are going to come out of that? Not just regulation, but I'm saying like the transparency piece. You know, how transparent is that? How cryptographically proven is that when called upon, right? Because they can't go back and change history. You know, this is that double-edged sword that I'm talking about when it comes to the financial markets starting to come into this. Is some of the behavioral things that have happened in the past, do those start to go away? Because once that stuff's on a blockchain, the enough chain analysis heuristics that can come from that, if they leave it in non-privatized methods like ring signatures and stuff that comes from like Monero, and that stays on something like Bitcoin, that stays on something that's even their own chain, but is still cryptographically could be an audited, you know, from, let's say, a regulator. That's a lot of the, not just the payment gateways and structures that make up that technology, but really the governance that comes around it. I think that's really what we'll see in 2019, based on listening to the Digital Money Forum, listening to the conversations that were out there on the floor of people talking about, okay, what's this really mean for us on an innovation on the institution side, and what kind of vehicles come out of that from, you know, products and services. Is it stuff like Robinhood, where anybody could be walking around and having an ability to quickly buy, sell, and trade different other content than just stocks, you know, and you're sitting there just flipping it from your app, right? What's the manifestation of that makes it easy for onboarding for people? And then just it's being facilitated by crypto in the bottom. So that was essentially North American Bitcoin Conference, and part of it, the CES, of some of the conversations that came out of there from the innovation side, from where things are going, from regulation, and that I essentially captured and then was co-captured from people that were feeding information to me. Then I guess in this week, that was a lot. I've been talking for a little bit. Hopefully you guys are enjoying some of the content. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to get through this, and then we'll take maybe a couple questions and stuff. So if you guys have asked me something, I haven't been paying attention to the question feed, but hopefully it's good and quantitative content for you guys. Excuse me. So then we had GRIN and Beam, the MimbleWimble technology implementation endorsement. The key piece that came out there, a lot of coins come out, a lot of tech comes out. You have different algorithms that come out. If it's proof of stake, if it's hybrid proof of stake, if it's a proof of work coin with just some tweak of an algorithm, usually doesn't get a lot of exposure, no matter what it is, you know, from an adoption from an industry standpoint. But seeing something, you know, the manifestation since the 2016 white paper essentially on MimbleWimble came out, and actually seeing it grow to the point that you actually have a coin that some folks that are kind of, you know, excited about, at least to explore. I think you're going to have your normal, you know, speculators coming up there saying, oh, it's going to be worth whatever. And you're going to have people that are going to jump right on the mining. I personally didn't jump right into it for a multitude of reasons. One, I wasn't here. I was in CES. Two, the monetary policy kind of scares me. It's unlimited, and I don't see how, you know, that really bodes well. I mean, if you look at it in the beginning with Ethereum, it was in the same kind of capacity where they didn't have like a high limit on how much was going to be there, because it was more of like gas, and you needed to keep producing that because you're going to have people using a platform, and it was a continuous burn. So eventually you'd have this equilibrium of how much is the inflationary period, how much is the burn period, and you'd have this equilibrium of price. But since then, and the pivot away from the concept of just every execution requires a gas burn, when you start talking about sharding and side chains and all this other stuff, you get into a concept where, you know, I haven't done enough research on GRIN to see where that makes sense to keep it unlimited. But looking at it from how it functions right now is my focus. Does it, you know, what's the advantages of it? And, you know, from the privacy aspects of it, you know, is that something that, you know, short of bulletproofs and stuff that's going on with Bitcoin, what at some point would this be enough to convince enough people on Bitcoin to implement something, you know, from a privacy standpoint on it? So that's got me interested in at least researching it, but not necessarily mining it. So I am going to add this to the BBT multi-miner. I've had a huge amount of messages from people that have asked me to just add it to the multi-miner and the testing that we're doing with it, so they have an option to it. But from my understanding, there's a huge amount of mining hash power on this coin. So, you know, is it going to be worth your power? I mean, that's a good question. You guys just got to look at the numbers just like anybody else. What's the hash rate? What is my output based on my power cost? And does it make sense for you? It might be one of those situations where if you do want to acquire it, then you acquire it on an exchange. I don't even know all the exchanges that it's on right now. I think it's not on any huge exchanges. I think it's on a decentralized exchange right now. But, you know, and then take a position in it, but you're still buying at the hype level. So you got to be careful on that kind of side. So again, I'm going to have a separate thing on GRIN and respective Beam using the same kind of tech, and then kind of mining status on that. We'll test it with a few of the different cards. I do have a handful of cards that I want to test. We're getting the Radeon 7. That should be right when I get back from a vacation. I'm taking a vacation from the 26th to the February 2nd. But when I get back from there on February 7th, getting a Radeon 7, we'll be testing that. And then I'm looking at the RTX 2060 and 2070 because we haven't done those tests. I also have two RX 2080 Ti's that we'll probably throw in the mix and do kind of a refresh update 2019 style of what are the hash rates across most of all the algorithms. I think you guys would like that. We'll do a live stream for that. And then we could test the RTX series and just see where things are at, even though it's not a huge popular thing to do mining right now because still the amount of hash power that's out there on the current networks versus what they're worth makes it very unprofitable for a lot of people out there unless you have very good power costs. So it's more of just for that kind of scientific, like, observe and report, like, what's this do if I happen to purchase RTX 2060 or a Radeon 7, what's its output do? So it's always good to know from multiple sources. Hopefully some of the other channels cover that kind of content too. I think that'll be still good. One of the questions coming from chat is, your farm still down? Yes, we turned that off last week. So the farm is right now turned off. It is not, it's so close to profitability right now to where pretty much everything we would mine, we'd be just handing right back to the power company. So right now it's still down. So again, most of that was, it's just the reality of the situation for our particular situation. So from a small mining rig standpoint, I'm still have a few, because I'll make that investment myself on some coins, that I'm still mining ETC on a few mining rigs, and I'm still mining for RVN. So to answer one of the questions from the crowd. Yeah, I think a lot of people are interested to see the Radeon 7. So yeah, that'll be coming up. So let's get back into the last piece of this live stream here. We're at 30 minutes. I'm going to try to wrap this up in the next 15, and then we'll have a live stream. If you don't follow me on Twitch, you should be following me on Twitch. That's more the traditional live streams that you guys would see from me, where we'd be like looking at mining rigs and testing out stuff. So that's later on today after both of the NFC and AFC championship games, because I'm going to be watching those. Prog proof of work. So Prog proof of work, a few weeks, 3 or so weeks back, was announced that the Ethereum team was looking at getting an interim release between Constantinople and Istanbul releases. Constantinople got moved. There's been a myriad of information that came out why they did that. Because there was a potential for an issue in a smart contract. Not that they found any on the mainnet, but they were worried enough to where they moved it. That looks like that's going to be in the first week or so of February. The Constantinople release gets out. Now, add plus 3 months to that would be probably the best case scenario to get a mid hard fork for Prog proof of work if it's accepted. Now, since that announcement on Ethereum, there's been a lot of, I would say, negative. Well, not a lot. I think it's what would occur if you came out with a big decision on anything. You're going to have people opposing it. And with that, they're going to bring up a whole merit of rationale of why they don't agree with Ethereum going through a hard fork of the proof of work mining algorithm. This late in the process. And then the fact that the ultimate goal was to have Ethereum, move to a proof of stake, which we're now on what, year 2 of waiting for that. And it's not a hit to the Ethereum team. It's just the realities of the situation. It's the release has been pushed quite a long time. So the fact of the matter is they made that decision. So now from that, what's the negative approaches on going to Prog proof of work? And part of it is the confidence that you won't have a hiccup on the tech. So let's talk facts right now. Let's talk tech facts. Let's talk about the stuff that's going on right now, and then I'll get into some of what people have been claiming and what people have opinions on, so opinion-based content. So the fact-based content is that there's at least two test nets out there where you can go out there and test your equipment using the variant of the Prog proof of work algorithm. So in December, there was a few tweaks to it, and that created kind of a new branch of Prog proof of work. Those were tweaks brought up by Ethereum developers looking at some content within the open source code and saying, hey, why don't we tweak some of this other stuff? And then there's some time latency that was going on with part of the algorithm. So they made some tweaks, recompiled that, and then have that on the testnet. Now, there's a few miners out there with regards to the software that you use, both on the AMD and Nvidia side, on how you download and you can test on the testnet. There's been an update since I updated the multi-miner, which is where you could download that from our GitHub. So if you go out to, if you just look up BBT multi-miner spelled out like that, you'll get to the GitHub for BBT. And under that, in the right-hand corner, you'll have a little green box that you can check, or that you can click to download, and you will have the last few options there. I think they're options 71 through 75 are the two different Prog proof of works test nets, which allow you just to test your hardware, your gear. Now, the version I have out there at least on the Nvidia side, requires you to download the CUDA toolkit. Now, since then, they have fixed that and included the dependencies that are needed for you to run the prog proof of work algorithm on the testnet with your Nvidia cards, where you don't need to download some other dependency thing. So I need to update that. That's one of the goals today, is to update the version that's out there on the multi-miner, and then you guys have the latest version of that build, and then you don't need to download any other dependencies. You just essentially download it and you can hit a button, and then it'll run on the testnet. Now that's set up to a testnet wallet that I set up. You can go out there and create a testnet wallet. There's a few tutorials on how to do that, to go into like my Ether wallet and add a new node that points to prog proof of work. And then that gives you an ability to create in like MetaMask your prog proof of work testnet address. Or you can just use the one that's in the multi-miner. None of those coin generations are going, I mean, they're testnet coins. They're essentially worthless. So it's more of just validating that you can do as a miner. So this is a two-part thing. You can test your equipment if you choose to test the prog proof of work with your equipment. And then you can also, if you set up your own wallet, you can start to do transactions between yourself or to the network to create kind of some transaction pool on prog proof of work testing, which is also the kind of, I'd call it phase 2. The first part, I was looking to just help people get on board to test the algorithm, because if Ethereum's going to change this, people need to test it, and they need to punch holes through it to see if it doesn't function or work. Second part of it is transaction on chain. Does stuff work when you put a load on the chain of transactions? So mining is just looking for the nonce to be able to create new coins and post the block of transactions on its current block time with Ethereum's 15 seconds. The transactions that make up those blocks is the people transferring stuff, and that there's a very limited load on Ethereum's testnet right now. That to build any kind of confidence, you're going to have to do like a load test where people are just all sending stuff. Now I've reached out to try to say, hey, they should, deploy some of the smart contracts, like anything that allows us to be able to go to a website and click through, like if you had CryptoKitties or something, smart contract deployed to prog proof of work, and then people could like fire up a new version of that and then be able to trade between each other. Some other group needs to be able to deploy a smart contract out there that we can all interact with our coins. That would create the ecosystem for us to be able to create a lot of transactions on that network. So that's kind of phase 2. I would look at that in the next month or so, pushing hard to see if we can get some kind of, prog proof of work testnet web page set up to where people can try to throw a lot of transactions. You could do like Satoshi Dice, something that's our, ETH Dice or whatever the subunit for Ethereum. I think it's called GUI, to where you could do, just fake transactions to just get the volume up and test the testnet. So that's another thing that's needed. So these are all factual things to do testing, make sure your equipment works, make sure the miners work. At some point, have Claymore or any of the other closed source miners put miners out there for we can test it. It has to be tested before it goes live. Nobody will ever make a decision to push that live until it's tested. So those are the testing that are needed. Now we can get into more of the I would call it the speculative source content related to people's opinions of the designers of prog proof of work and some key figures that have been part of that. And I see Twitter and I see people posting on Discord and just putting out a lot of their opinions on the matter. And so personally, I know Christy, that is God a girl on the system. I've known of her since 2014, and I met her for the first time in ETH Prog, where she gave the prog proof of work, full display of how it functions, how the hashing algorithm functions, and what the differences between ETH hash and prog proof of work was, which is out there on YouTube. You guys can actually go watch that. She was in person and showed how that was working. So there is a lot of challenging factors of people that have issues with how prog proof of work came into existence. And part of that, to me, so anybody can have an opinion on something. That's perfectly fine. But when you make assumptions that some group was responsible, so the individuals were responsible for building it. Those people are available to asked questions. They've been out there. They've been working with the ETH developers on trying to modify specific settings that make sense for the Ethereum network from timing aspects. And when you start really breaking down some of the arguments of like, well, Nvidia is behind this, and because somebody on quote unquote good authority, none of those arguments work for crap. They're speculation, right? They're an opinionated thing. What we look for in general, what I look for, I say when we with like BBT, if I'm going to be involved in mining something and quote unquote, because of my observation, promote something because I'm like, hey, this works, this functions this way, right, wrong, or different, this is the way it works. For me to get behind something, I want to be able to review it. I want to be able to see, okay, that makes sense. I'm not caught up in the fact if Microsoft was involved in it, if Nvidia was involved in it, and if they were directly, like, what's the sinister thing that's coming out of this? What if AMD, what if it was flipped and like a lot of AMD developers did it on their own time? Because they happen to work for AMD, they are bad people or something? I mean, the argument is flawed from the very nature of speculation, right? So if people have something programmatically encrypted, you know, like there's something wrong with the algorithm that's twisted to tie it to one vendor versus another, then call that out technically and say, you know, this would be a better approach. But the fact of the matter is a lot of AMD versus Nvidia hardware, you know, from a gaming, can you imagine this in a gaming standpoint? Oh, those FPSs that Nvidia just put out are just wrong. They built that game for it. When that game starts, it has an Nvidia RTX ad. I'm not going to play that game because they're squatting on AMD. They're not playing forward for AMD to be good in that game. Like, it's preposterous, guys. Like, some hardware is tuned differently for whatever the application is. If prog proof of work, and if you look at the hardware from Nvidia, which I've had both, right? I mean, most of our farm is all AMD, right? But when you look at the development of this and the applicational use on chip and through the memory interfaces and the types of memory that's on the cards and the ASIC architecture and stuff, they're different. And some things may bode well for Nvidia. There are some things that are a lot. You don't see that same argument going on with Monero with the Vega, right? It's what, oh, you know, Nvidia is just getting screwed. The people that built Crypto Night were completely against Nvidia. Like, no, man, it's the way it functions on chip. Like, there's advantages to the way the architecture and the HBM2 worked with the Vega comparison to Nvidia. But my Titan V that has HBM2 and tweaked is up there, right up there, close to Vega. Now there's a big cost difference. It's architecture. So let's talk architecture. Let's talk output, and that's the kind of arguments that I want to see. Like, if there's not some conspiracy theory because you have a problem with somebody personally, right? So there was I tweeted it out today. You guys can go out there to Twitter and see one of my Twitter posts that come from an Ethereum developer that has studied essentially this entire kind of speculative BS that's came out from this entire ecosystem. And he has I'm not going to read it. It's out there. You guys can go out there and see the post. It's actually on the FPGA forums. It's on, he had posted it under Ethereum and kind of countered it to say, over the past 6 months, he's looked at it architecturally. He's looked at the algorithm. And at the end of the day, it comes down to just there's personal issues with people between folks. And it creates this ecosystem where people just are going to use every situation they can to try to, say that something was wronged. And at the end of the day, it's observe and report. So that... the main point, like I've told people before, I was speculating against, a lot of the efforts that were coming out when it came to like the ETH pill. If everybody remembers, I went out there, I was like, unless they're exploiting something, I wouldn't download this. And as I started to understand how it was working more architecturally, of doing an in-memory essentially shift to where we can't go out there and change the memory timings on Nvidia chips, and you have the ETH pill that came out, and seeing that actually worked, right, wrong, or indifferent, you use that ETH pill, you went from 35 mega hash to 50 mega hash. Amongst anybody's opinions of things, that's the reality that occurred. So, all of that, it all comes down to what is the output? and what has been created for that. And if there's some kind of back-end system incentive for people to try to weigh the situation, challenge it and try to counter it technically, not speculatively. That's what it comes down to. So, brush up on your coding skills. Prove that it can be better on the AMD side. We all AMD people want to, that have AMD cards would love nothing more than that, right? So that's my main thing is I'm not going to get caught up in the BS of people fudding different stuff. If something comes out and there's a true smoking gun out there, at the end of the day, the code's open source, right? No matter what the intention was, the code's open source. So that's where I'm going to leave that. And I'm not going to call anybody in the crypto space completely out, but I know Buried One did do a video on this. And literally, I met him in Vegas and drove him to an event. And we had a discussion on this entire thing. And like I told him before, he made a video on calling out Christie and like everything minority and all their stuff with the FPGAs. I said, just rest it in facts of what the situation is. Otherwise, you're like the TMZ of crypto. And that's the way people will remember it. Why I don't have anything particularly personally against Christie, the involvement with minority and whatever's going on in the background of that is between their company. I did make an investment of creating a, purchase in the BBT team made an investment in some of the squirrel things. And, right now we haven't even taken the time to try to get them to work because of the falter of this stuff. And I put that as par for the course in all of my experience with FPGAs, from Avalon to KNC Titans to the original Sponduli techs, which actually probably were the best ones that I ever had from an ASIC standpoint, to everything that was specialized mining equipment of my experience by and large. There was either some kind of BS that came with it, some other kind of overhead of situation with some kind of back end like deal or some crap that came with that entire space, that ecosystem. And the reason why I don't cover a lot of specialized mining equipment on this channel is just that all of the stuff, by and large, I would say short of the Sponduli tech, which actually just plugged in and functioned. And I would almost say some of the Bitmain stuff, which I don't own, but I've heard from people from S4 all the way up to S9, so just you plugged them in, they functioned, have been drama filled in some capacity. And minority just checks that other box that there was just, they had an idea. They had a lot of, push marketing with it. People bought, and then they also offered a refund, which a lot of companies, I know that KNC Titan that I never received, right? One of my fellow mining constituents, I would call it, people that I keep up with mining, actually got one. I was able to review it in 2014. I never got mine. I spent $10,000 on it, right? So they went under. I never got it. I never got a refund. The squirrel we decided to keep. We haven't tested it yet. Right? Because there was a lot of like the miner's not going to be ready yet and the miner hasn't been ready yet and all this other stuff. And I just call it par with the course with that. And that gives me another rationale of why I'm not buying into FPGAs and anything that I have to rely on other people when it comes to hosting or the content delivery from a bit stream, right? There's a lot of open source miners out there for GPUs, and that's the world that I stick in. Par for the course is so true. It's just I look at that. I'm glad for the people that were able to get their refund on it. I personally do not have any information of why the situation failed, why there was a lot of delays. But I'm going to tell you, when you're printing and minting content when it comes to hardware, that supply line and supply issues or flaws in designs that are caught late in the cycle can bury you. And that's part of the risk with specialized mining equipment that never gets talked about. It's this great idea. It's this great concept. You think you have it nailed. You've done your due diligence. You've done your iterative testing. And then it gets printed. And then it was using, nickel-based, solder or something that just doesn't bode well with temperatures and heat. And now things are off. And now you got this issue. There's an entire ecosystem of issues when it comes to creating your own content. And that's part of the risk that goes with that. Now, you usually take that in stride, figuring that, hey, they're working with reputable vendors. They're going to be able to get this thing done. And that's just part of doing the task of building the thing. But there's a whole myriad of reasons why I don't like to be in that world of specialized mining hardware. That I want a large company behind it. I want a lot of channel ability when you come to AIBs, such as like Asus and EVGA and all these other things. That's why I've always liked the crypto market being part of the GPU side. So there's just so many supply issues with that then will get wrapped up in that the company's having an issue, and that there's people that are challenged, and you know, you promised me this and you never delivered. And all that being said is that, like, hey, if the plan executed right and we got the stuff right, everything would have been fine, but it wasn't. And now I'm up, you know, these people up there get called fraudsters. And I don't know that full situation. I mean, maybe there was something in the background that we don't know that has not came out, right? But bottom line, it's par for the course. Like, take any purchase of specialized mining equipment with a grain of salt. It's the same thing with the new MimbleWimble slash what is it? I don't know. Remember the name of the algorithm? It's like Cuckoo 31, which Obelisk said that they're gonna build a specialized mining hardware for $3,000 for it. Okay, so hopefully that works out. I personally won't be testing it. And even if they reached out to ask me to test it, I wouldn't. I'll let another channel handle that, just because of the, you know, you guys know my opinion on it. So, I think I'm going to wrap this one up for this video. So kind of try to cover some of the spec. I don't like doing that last part, because I don't like being part of that speculative crap that goes on in the FUD scene, but I wanted to make sure I covered part of it, since I had so much coverage on Prog Proof of Work, was out there at ETH Dev Prog and saw Prog Proof of Work from Christie, had talked about the Squirrel Miner, which we still haven't tested, which we will test. I just have not matched up with BBT Todd. He's up in Wisconsin. I've been traveling a lot. I'm actually traveling again at the end of this week. For a week, I'll be down in the Caribbean. That's a family vacation. It's once a year. That's kind of mostly offline. I might tweet some stuff out there, but and then the next 2 weeks after that, I'll be doing some limited travel, going to IBM Think 2019. That's in San Francisco. And then I'll be in DC right before that. So I'll try to catch up with you guys out there on the road when we're out there. But a lot of stuff to get out there. And we'll get the CES content out this week. So hopefully it's been good. I'll take a few questions if you guys have any stuff. And I'd like to hear some of your opinions on it. You guys are more than welcome to put your experiences in the Asics side too. Asics have been the nicest to me. Yeah, so I mean, from a usability, I don't think anybody's going to argue. When I kept giving, I guess, props to Sponduli Tech stuff, on the SP35 that I had tested back in 2014, that thing you plugged in, it was loud as hell, but it functioned every day, never had a problem, and just did its thing. It put out exactly what it said it was going to put out. It was almost 5 terahash at the time for 2,400 watts, and it functioned every day for every day that it was on. And like, there is something to be nice and said about that, but the arms race that are Asics, once they start to propagate, is as extensive, and that entire ecosystem of growth and who predicates if the test equipment ends up on main chain before you get it, which drives up difficulty. You look at the entire ecosystem of that, and the onboarding of it creates a cycle that is very hard to keep up with. And that's been my experience with all Asics. Versus GPUs, people that build a GPU coin that there's no specialized equipment for, it's predicated on retail adoption of GPUs. Some with the mining GPUs could be considered, you know, now that there's proliferation of lots of mining farms out there, it's a little different world. But at least in the 2014, 2013, when a new coin came out, it was predicated on who all had GPUs. And it wasn't necessarily that you had somebody in the background that had bought a lot of GPUs at the time, short of maybe Genesis Mining. I agree. I don't think FPGAs are going to go mainstream like Asics GPUs. FPGAs are programmable. So, I mean, if somebody tweaks an algorithm and it still can fit on the die of the FPGA, or if the FPGA is used as part of the cycle, of meaning like you can have some of it going on a GPU and then some of it being all cycled over to an FPGA, because you could write that interleave, the component that's going to set out on FPGA, then yeah, it's a very specialized thing, and there's no incentive unless somebody's selling the bit stream for them to share it with you, right? There's no, because there is a lot of effort that goes into that, and there's a lot of testing, and it's not as and sometimes it's very rapid as you're making adoption on it. It's very I would say contextualized to the people that are specialized that are going to do it. RTX Titan's doing 41 mega hash. That's about what I'm seeing on the Titan V. The Titan V, I think my peak was 43 mega hash on Prog Proof of Work, which is a little faster than Titan RTX. All right, guys. If you guys don't have any more questions. Have you looked into the block miner? No, F1. I have not looked at any of the Asics. I would say, and I've tried to give you guys some content out there. I'm going to start to try to make sure that if some of the other ecosystem folks like the Technicals, he's an up and coming YouTuber that's covering a lot of the FPGAs, and that's where he wants to be. I mean, I'll make sure that you guys know that he's doing that for at least from my streams. I think he just covered it. But I wasn't planning on covering that. You know, I know Voss Coin has covered some ASIC content and continues to. He's another one that you guys can go to. Seth Estrada, I know, has covered. I don't know if he's covered as much on the FPGA side, but another YouTuber there that's done some mining stuff. And then there's some up and coming like Twitch streamers. Crypto Nuffy, he's usually in our chat too. He's been doing just kind of the stuff that I used to do with the larger like videos of like building a mining rig and all that kind of stuff. And we'll get into, as I'm starting to try to pivot to more we'll cover mining stuff. That's what this channel has been, and I'll try to help explain some of the content of where it comes from and why it matters. But I'm trying to also expand that into the ecosystem of doing the deep dives on the technicals and where they come in, where some of the innovation comes in play. So, notice this working content. You can get a hold of me on bispytrippin at gmail.com, or you can tweet to me and then I'll follow you and we can DM. So it's at bispytrippin. So I'm going to wrap this one up, guys. If you don't follow me on Twitter, I'll be on Twitter, or I'll be texting or send a message on Twitter. But if Twitch, I'll be doing a live stream later today. We're going to put up another mining rig here, like a full-size mining rig. One of the here, let's so we'll pull one of the ones in the back here. I got a couple back here that we can pull over and do some testing with. You guys can follow me on Twitch, and we'll do some live streaming there on Twitch and get into the weeds a little further. But hopefully this has been good content. I think we'll expand on this on Twitch tonight, and then look on bitsbytrippin.io for some of those updates that I had earlier in the video. So thanks for hanging out, and we'll catch you guys later on Twitch. Peace.